Okay, thank you everybody for joining. As usual, we'll do the introduction, the Parsha in a nutshell, which we'll share on the screen, and we have it here in handout. But we always need an introduction to the introduction. So just to place us where we need to be within the context of the broader Torah. So we are in the third book of the Torah, the book of Leviticus, and the first half of the book was mainly associated with laws that are associated with the temple. So you had offerings in the temple, you had the story of the construction of the temple, you had laws of purity and impurity that are mostly relevant for the temple. That was the first half of the book. And then last week was this new anomaly, the idea that Kedoshim Tiyu, that everybody could be holy, that holiness is not specific to the temple, but every person living their daily, mundane, seemingly mundane life. If you live it in a moral way, then that is the definition of holiness. So that's all part of the first half of the book. Now we shift a little bit in this parsha, because even though we start talking a little bit about the priests, we can get to that. It's a little bit about the temple. We'll put that in context. But I would say that the majority of the parsha, what takes up many of the verses and most of the verses, is the laws of the holidays, and not necessarily the way the holidays are performed or expressed in the temple, which would be the offerings of the holidays that you actually get in the fourth book of the Torah, but mostly how most of the Jewish people celebrate the holidays. One way to think about this is if the first half of the book is talking about the mitzvah of the idea of creating a temple, which is a holy place, then the question is there a holy time? Right? So just like the temple is a space that is designated for the service of God, the question is there a time that's designated for holiness? And the answer is yes. The answer is that's the Shabbat and the holidays. So in some ways to think about the idea of the holiness in different dimensions. In the beginning, it's the temple, that's the space. Now we'll get into the dimension of time and the holidays. And of course, there are many holidays because there are many different themes that we celebrate. We could talk about the details or what they all have in common. Hopefully we can keep ourselves busy for a few minutes talking about the holidays. Okay, so we'll go to the Parsha in a nutshell as usual. I'll share the screen and then we'll read it. Here we go. The name of the Parsha, Emor, means speak, and is found in Leviticus 21, chapter 21, verse 1. The Torah section of Emor begins with the special laws pertaining to the Kohanim priests, the Kohen Gadol high priests, and the temple service. What are they? A Kohen may not become ritually impure through contact with a dead body, save on the occasion of the death of a close relative. A Kohen may not marry a divorcee or a woman with a promiscuous past. A Kohen Gadol can marry only a virgin. That's a high priest, so it's even more regulation. A Kohen with a physical deformity cannot serve in the holy temple, nor can a deformed animal be brought as an offering. So the beginning of the Parsha is certainly laws of the Kohanim, laws of the priests. A newborn calf, lamb, or kid must be left with its mother for 7 days before being eligible for an offering. One may not slaughter an animal and its offspring on the same day. So it's also related to offerings in the temple. Okay. Second part of Emor lists the annual callings of holiness. That's the word that the Torah uses for holy times. Kol mikra'e, callings of holiness, the festivals of the Jewish calendar, beginning with the weekly Shabbat, the bringing of the Passover offering on 14th of Nisan, the 7-day Passover festival beginning on the 15th of Nisan, the bringing of the Omer offering from the first barley harvest on the 2nd day of Passover, and the commandments on that day of the 49-day counting of the Omer, culminating in the festival of Shavuot on the 50th day. A remembrance of a shofar blowing on the 1st of Tishrei, which is what we call Rosh Hashanah, the new year, the head of the year. The Torah doesn't refer to that way, but that's how we refer to it. A solemn fast day on 10 Tishrei, we would call that Yom Kippur. Well, the Torah also calls that Yom Kippur, just not in this context, I don't think. The Sukkot festival, during which we are dwell in huts for 7 days and take the 4 kinds, beginning on the 15th of Tishrei, and the immediately following holiday of the 8th day of Sukkot Shmini Atzeret. Next, the Torah discusses the lighting of the menorah in the temple, which is interesting because we already discussed it twice. Why is it being repeated? And the showbread lechem apanim placed weekly on the table there. Now, Emor concludes with a very short episode. It's not positive, it's negative, but it's interesting that there are only 2 short episodes in the entire third book of the Torah. There's no plots, except this is the second one. The first is the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, but there's another story. Emor concludes with the incident of a man executed for blasphemy and the penalties for murder, death, and for injuring one's fellow or destroying his property, monetary compensation. So it ends with some civil law, and that's the end of this week's Parsha. Again, toward the end of the book of Leviticus. We'll open some of the verses and we're Torah reading. Okay. Is it a little hot in here? Is it just me? Okay. Beautiful. Okay, where do we start from? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the laws of purity and impurity for the priest. If you look at it, I opened up the screen, Leviticus chapter 21. You know, if you want to look in the book, you can, if you want to, but then you have to pass me books. I can tell you what page it is. So there are 2 books there. If you want to look at the art scroll, it's on page and more. Page 673, laws of the priests. And the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, let none of you defile himself or a dead person among his people. We discussed a little bit, we discussed at some length the laws, the meaning behind the laws of purity and impurity a few weeks ago. But here we will have other opportunities in the 4th book of the Torah as well. But so you can't go to a funeral, you can't touch a dead corpse if you are a Kohen, a priest, a descendant of Aaron. There are exceptions, except for his relative who is close to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and for his virgin sister who was close to him, who was not yet with a man. To her he shall defile himself. A husband shall not defile himself for a wife who caused his desecration while she is among his people. That's another story. Kohen marries someone who he's not supposed to marry. Then he cannot become impure to his wife. But other than that, he could become impure to his wife. So there are 7 relatives. And then it talks about the idea that the Torah actually repeats it elsewhere. So it's repeated here about not having excessive mourning. So in verse 5, right, it says, they shall not make a bald spot on their heads. They shall not make bald patches on their heads, nor shall they shave the edge of their beard, nor shall they make cuts in their flesh. He continues, they shall be holy to their God, and they shall not desecrate their God's name, for they offer the fire offering to the Lord, food offering of their God, so they shall be holy. What he's saying is not tearing the flesh is a form of mourning. In other words, in the ancient world, when people wanted to show that they're sad and upset that somebody passed on, they'll do excessive acts of their bodies. They'll tear their skin, they'll pull out their hair. The Torah says no excessive mourning for the priest. Elsewhere, it says it too about the Israelites, but here we're talking in the context of the priests. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Why is it so important to talk about in this specifically in this location? And one of the questions are, okay, so why here is the question. In other words, in a way, if you wanted to talk to me about the laws of the priests, you should have talked to me about the laws of the priests earlier in the book. Last week's Parsha, we shifted from the priests to all the Israelites, how all the Israelites can be holy. And this week's Parsha, again, we're talking about, what are we talking about? The holidays. And the holidays are relevant to all the Jewish people. So if you asked me, if they hired me to edit the book, thank God they didn't, but if they hired me, it reminds me of the joke that there was a new publication of the Chumash, new translation of the Chumash, of the Bible, and so the store wanted to generate customers, so they advertise, they say, buy the Bible with the author's signature. They meant the translator, but they put the author. So I don't know, I guess people may not to that. But in any case, if you asked me to edit the book, what would I do? Where would I put the laws of the priests? Much earlier in the book. But no, we put the laws of the priests right here in the context of holiness for the rest of the Jewish people. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is the Torah is separating the priests from holiness, priests from death. And that is something that is not so, it's unusual if you think about other cultures. And I didn't notice this until I read it in one of the commentators, but once I read it in the commentators, you can actually see, especially in New England. But anyway, I think if you look, for example, at churches, very often there's a cemetery right outside the church. And there's some closeness between the house of worship and the cemetery, because I don't know, I guess it's all spiritual business. Judaism, what are we saying? The priest is not allowed to go to a cemetery. The cemetery and the house of worship have to be completely separate. And that's why actually in Jerusalem, which was a city was supposed to be serving the temple, and temple you need ritual purity. So there was no cemetery in Jerusalem. The cemetery, Mount Olives, is very close to Jerusalem, but it's outside the borders of biblical Jerusalem, because you were not supposed to bury a person in Jerusalem. So what do we see here? We see here a separation between the Kohen, the priest, and the idea of the cemetery or the passing of the soul. And the question is, how come? So there could be different theories, but one theory is the whole idea of the priest is not so much to spirituality per se. Because if you talk about the soul per se, then the cemetery could be a holy place because it represents the fact that the body, the separation between body and soul, and now soul is eternal, and now soul is free. It's a way to connect to the soul in a way. But holiness in Judaism is not necessarily just focusing on the soul, but more importantly, it's connecting the body and the soul. So in other words, in Judaism, holiness is life. Life is connection of body and soul. Of course, the soul lives on forever. That's true. But that's not what we're trying to highlight. What we're trying to highlight is that Kohen teaches you, the priest teaches you, not how to, quote unquote, pass on, how to prepare yourself for the afterlife where you're just going to be a soul. It's a wonderful thing, but that's not the goal of Judaism. The goal of Judaism is to connect the soul with the body, with the daily life. And therefore, the purpose of a Kohen represents connecting the soul and the body, the soul and daily life. And that's why the Kohen is the antithesis of the dead person, which is a separation of the body and the soul. That also may be why we actually place the laws of the priest, at least these laws that he has to separate from the impurity of a dead person, because within the story of the Israelites, because the whole purpose of the Kohen, as we're discussing it, is to connect to the rest of the people. So in that sense, it has to be surrounded by the stories of the rest of the people. Then there's one more interesting thing I want to say about this before we get to the holidays, because the holidays can take up a lot of time here. One important point is that there is on verse 4, where it says, verse 4 reads, "But a husband shall not defile himself for his desecration," whatever that means, "among his people." Be'amav, among his people. So here the sages have a very interesting teaching. The sages have an interesting teaching. What the sages say is that, so we have the priest and even the high priest, and the priest is not allowed to become impure for a dead person except for 7 relatives. The high priest is not allowed to become pure for anybody, even a close relative, a person. He's not allowed to go to the funeral, can't touch the body, etc. What happens if, however, there is something called a met mitzvah, a dead person nobody doesn't have any relatives, and there's nobody to care for that person, either because there's no one in the city able to take care of the person, or because it's on the road, so there's nobody around. So here, the law is that the high priests and even the high priest have to become ritually impure to take care of this corpse, take care of this person. And it's derived from verse 4, where it says a person should not defile himself, the priest should not defile himself be'amav, among his people. Meaning, if the corpse is within his people, if there are other people who are able to take care of the person. What happens if there's nobody else? If there's nobody else, then the priest himself has to become impure. What does that show? That shows that if you have a conflict between the holiness of the priest and the caring for the people, which value takes precedent? The caring for the people is more important than the holiness of the priest. And that's consistent with what we're saying, that the whole purpose of the priesthood is not so much to create a class of people who are separate and apart from the world, but to teach people how to bring the holiness to the world. So that's why, that's where you see that this concept is expressed in the law, even in the law that says that they have to be separate from death and therefore from other people's funerals. But if there's nobody else and somebody needs a favor, they have to step in, and that becomes the law. So that's a little bit just to talk about the laws of the priests. There's a lot more to say, but I think the holidays are interesting because the holidays are relevant to every single Jew. Not everybody here is a priest. I'm not a priest. So when it comes to the holidays, all of a sudden, this is something where every single Jew experiences the holidays and experiences the holiness, and therefore maybe we should focus a little bit about the holidays. So there's
Rabbi,
go ahead.
in contemporary Judaism, does a Kohen continue to have a special role in your community? And if so, what would it be?
Mostly prohibitions, okay? The Kohen has a lot of prohibitions on who he can marry, which is a problem. Well, not a problem, which is difficulty. So a Kohen cannot marry some of the most common, I don't want to say clash, but the most common difficulty is a Kohen marrying a divorcee. So that's a prohibition that you're not supposed to do. Kohen is not allowed to become impure, but there are not ways around that. You can go to a funeral without becoming impure, because as long as you're not under the same roof as a dead person. A Kohen's working in a hospital, a Kohen being a doctor is a potential problem, especially if there's because there's a morgue, and then it's so in Israel they solve that problem because in Israel they solve the problem. They place the morgue outside the hospital, so they could, or at least halachically outside the hospital, where the impurity wouldn't transfer. But that's a concern. Where does the Kohen get? What benefit does the Kohen get? What honor does the Kohen get in contemporary life, Jewish life? The only honor the Kohen would get is that when you get called to the Torah, the Kohen gets called to the Torah first. So on Shabbat, there are 7 readings. The mitzvah is to honor the Kohen. The Kohen gets the first reading, the Levite gets the second reading, and the rest are just simple Israelites like myself. So that's the expression. Times in the temple, you also served in the temple, which is nice, but you also have some disadvantages in the sense that you don't get a portion in the land of Israel. So you get gifts of produce to sustain yourself from the Israelites, but you're not getting land. And in an agricultural society, not having land basically means you're dependent on other people. So if you asked me, would I want to trade and be a Kohen in biblical times? I don't know. There are pros and cons. I don't know if I could sell this to you. I'm not sure I could. But there's and it's interesting because we mentioned this in the past. If you look at the societies at the time, and we know clearly from the Egyptian society, it's recorded explicitly in the Torah. Usually, in a society, the priests had all the power. The priests owned land. The priests had tax-free land, and they also were the ruling class. And in Judaism, you really have a separation where the people who have the obligation to be sort of the moral voice within the Jewish people, and the people who represent the Jewish people before God in the temple, they actually do not have the material advantages they have less material advantages than the common person. So that's interesting. There's no class that has all the benefits. So today we take it for granted, but back then, comparing it to the other societies, it's actually interesting, I think. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the holidays. And again, one way to think about the holiday is everybody is holy on the holidays. It's not just, if you read the book of Leviticus up to this point, you say, yeah, holiness is the realm of the priest. Holiness is the realm of a specific place. But what happens if we say every person could call and bring holiness to their own life, and not only in their own life, but also wherever they may be? And that's something that the Torah emphasizes in this week's Parsha, wherever you may be, right? You don't have to be in Israel to celebrate the holidays. Anywhere you be, the holidays apply. And by the way, the word for holiday is actually very, very interesting, because Moed is the word. Moed is a very interesting word in Hebrew. On one hand, it means appointed time. It also means meeting. So Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. So, but it also means an appointed time. So basically, if you put those two together, it's a time to meet. That's a holiday. I have to check, I have to Google what is the etymology of holiday in English. But the etymology of Moed in Hebrew, of holiday in Hebrew, is time to meet. Who am I meeting? Well, I'm meeting maybe myself, I'm meeting God. And during the day, I'm busy. During the week, I'm busy. I have to farm the land. I have to take my kids to school. I have to catch the train. So I have values and I have things that I want to achieve, but I don't necessarily have space on my calendar. Right? They talk about time management. There's two concepts. You have a to-do list, which is wonderful, all the things I want to do. But you can write a to-do list and get nothing done. Why? Because I don't have time to do it. So what's the other issue? The other way to manage time is to create a calendar. Now, somehow merging your to-do list with your calendar is the way to go. Find a place in the calendar when I'm going to be able to achieve this. It's not enough to say I want to do this because it doesn't mean I'm going to do it. So I want to spend time with family. I want to have time for God. I want to have time to study Torah. I want a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm going to have time, right? So the values they talk about you do there's what's important and what's urgent, and it's two different things, right? Getting to the cleaners is urgent. Getting to the cleaners is not important. In the long run, it's not important, right? But so you spend our day doing things that are urgent, and the things that are important, we don't necessarily have time for. So what the Torah says is make a time. That's a moed, that's a holiday. Make a time for those values that are important to you that you may not have time for the rest of the year. So that's moed, a time to meet. So it's a meeting, it's a date, but it's a time to meet. And you have both those words. So moed could work as tent of meeting, and there means a place of meeting. But the full meaning of moed is it has both those, like I said, it has both those elements. It has time and it has meeting. That's what it means. So it's time to meet. That's what a holiday is. So that's one thing just to give us into the concept of what we're trying to achieve with Shabbat and holiday, which is why we mentioned Shabbat, because Shabbat is technically not a holiday. They're very different, especially they're not, I don't want to get too technical here, but they're not invocations of holiness. When we read the Parsha in a nutshell, he has the quote here. He says, the second part of Emor, this is the annual callings of holiness, Mikra'ei Kodesh, callings of holiness, which is a fascinating concept because the way the Jewish calendar is set up is the people that call the meeting are the Jewish people. How do we decide when a holiday is? Well, it's on a certain date. But how do we decide the dates? Well, we follow the lunar calendar. But how exactly do we follow the lunar calendar? The Jewish people, the person, the court, has to determine that the new month began. So the Jewish people are instrumental in setting up the calendar and therefore setting up the holidays. That's the holidays. Shabbat is different. Shabbat is counted by the days of the week. The days of the week have nothing to do with the counting of the people. And the days of the week are sort of set in stone. So what happens if you're in a relationship? And the question is, we have to go out. The question is, who decides when we're going out? Who decides where we're going out to? So, short answer is I don't know. But the best way to do it is both people, both sides of the relationship take the initiative. Sometimes you decide what time we're going, and sometimes I decide. Sometimes you take the first step, sometimes I take the first step. Shabbat is God taking the first step. He says, this is our meeting. This seventh day is holy. There's nothing you can do one way or the other. Every seventh day is holy. The whole idea of the holidays, the way he refers to here, callings of holiness, is the people, we call it as holiness, the people make it holy. So here we have the date that the Jewish people determine, as opposed to Shabbat is the date that God determines. And that's why they're both in the same category, even though they're very different, because they're both the meetings, they're both moed. So I thought that was interesting to think about. Go ahead.
Moed isn't that ed like witness?
Witness. That's very, very good. Moed could be witness. So it's a time maybe I'm sure it's related. You could witness is get in touch into a deeper truth and tell the story that is not obvious. Right? What is testimony? Right? We say testimony. What is testimony? Testimony is I'm here to tell a story that not everybody knows. Right. So it's digging a little bit deeper. So yeah, I'm sure there's a connection between getting together and saying testimony. A lot of the holidays are testimonials for historic events, right? We talk about the Torah has different categories of mitzvot, and the holidays are in the category of Eidut, which is testimonials, because when we celebrate Passover, we're telling the story, we're testifying to the fact that God took us out of Egypt. So I guess it is connected, but it's sort of a connection, but it's a word that's related, but it's not the actual word. Moed, the actual meaning of the word moed would be meeting and time for meeting. Yeah, moed, yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit about meetings, holidays in general. There's other things that we could say about the holidays in general, which is what I want to do. One other interesting point about the holidays is that if you look at the holidays in the Torah, there are two rationales given for the holidays. What do we celebrate on the holidays? So there's one system of holidays, which is basically when every culture had it, maybe still does, but at least in the ancient world, every culture had it, which was holidays related to the cycle of agriculture. Simple. In the spring, you have a holiday celebrating the harvest. I'm sorry, the ripening of the fruit, Aviv, spring, ripening of the fruit. Then a little bit later, you have, beginning of the summer, you have what they would call harvest, katsir, cutting the grain, or cutting the fruit. And then at the end of the summer, you have the holiday of the ingathering. And that you don't have to be Jewish, and it's just sort of a natural holiday. You're celebrating the blessings, the bounty of the earth. Beautiful. Is the Torah, okay, so that's one cycle. Then you have what we would call the historic, so that's a natural cycle of holidays. Then you have the historic cycle. What's the historic cycle? We're celebrating the holidays that remind us of certain historic events. Passover, we were taken out of Egypt. Shavuot, we were given the Torah. Sukkot is again 6 months after we left Passover, also related to the exodus of Egypt. Hashem placed us in the huts when we left Egypt. Okay, wonderful. Which holidays do we have? What holidays does Judaism believe in? The natural holidays or the historic holidays? Again, historic holidays represent God's intervention in the world, whereas the agriculture holidays is just celebrating nature. And what's interesting about the holidays is the Torah does both together. The Torah refers to the holidays both in their agricultural cycle element, calls Shavuot the holiday of the harvest, calls Sukkot the holiday of the ingathering, and calls Pesach the holiday of the spring, the ripening of the fruit. Aviv, one of the meanings of spring in Hebrew, Aviv, is the ripening of the fruit. So what are we celebrating? We're celebrating nature. On the other hand, we don't have other holidays. Those same holidays are celebrating the historical events. In other words, the miraculous. In other words, God's intervention within nature to step in and do the unthinkable, which is take the Jewish people out of Egypt. It was impossible to break out of Egypt. No slave could be freed from Egypt in those days. So what is the message here? The message here, perhaps, is that Judaism's message is that the nature and the godly are not contradiction. In other words, nature itself, it's not that there's two things. It's not there's nature and that God intervenes within nature. Nature itself is also an expression of the miracle, right? Nature itself, the fact that the earth gives forth its produce, that itself is something that we thank God for. It's not that it's natural and God just interferes. So that idea to be able to see the world in both layers and understand that both the nature and the miracle are both, in other words, the natural and the historic, are both united. They both come from the same place. They both come from the same source. That is something we do when we celebrate the holidays. That makes sense? And that's why, by the way, the Torah gives both dates. The Torah gives the date on the lunar calendar, which is the historic calendar, which is the date that the historic events happen. On the other hand, it also gives the dates, the time of the seasons, and the season is the natural order, the order of the agriculture. What are we celebrating? We're not celebrating two separate things. We're celebrating them both together. Both are the expression of the same truth, because they both come from the same God. They both come from the source. So I thought that's sort of a little bit about the general concept of the holidays, even before we go into specifics, into specific discussions of specific holidays. Okay. Let's continue, right? I'm going to skip a little to the story of the holidays. It's on the screen here. So this is an interesting parsha, a unique parsha, because we're reading the holidays. We also can read about the mitzvah that we're supposed to do right now, which is the counting of the Omer, the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. So maybe best to read those inside and talk a little bit about those holidays, this story of the holidays before we get to other holidays. We'll have time. Maybe we'll have time for other holidays. Maybe we don't. Maybe we'll save for next year. But in any case, I am skipping to verse 9 on page in chapter 23. So here it's on the screen in the art scroll. It's on page 683. What did we say? What did we see? So there's this whole story that when you start celebrating the harvest in a way, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land which I am giving you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring to the Kohen an Omer of the beginning of your reaping. Omer is a measurement. And then they would raise the Omer, a whole story. They bring offerings. Don't eat the new fruit until the Omer. And then you move to verse 15. What's verse 15? Verse 15 on page 685. You shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day, meaning this is political, what exactly it means. The rabbis believe it means the day after Passover, from the day after the first day of Passover. So it's the second day of Passover. You count 50 days. You shall count, and you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day. From the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, 7 weeks they shall be complete. You shall count until the day after the 7th week, namely, God bless you, namely the 50th day, on which you shall bring a new meal offering to the Lord. From your dwelling places you shall bring bread, set aside 2 loaves, made from 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked leavened, the first offering to the Lord. And then you bring the offerings. That's the holiday of Shavuot, holiday of Bikurim. Verse 20 refers to it as a Bikurim. Verse 21 is, you shall designate on this very day a holy occasion. It shall be for you. You shall not perform any work of labor. This is an eternal statute in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. That's the second holiday, the holiday of Shavuot. And then it talks about the laws of the harvest. You should leave the gifts of produce for the poor when you perform the harvest. So this is the mitzvah of counting the Omer. And again, it's a mitzvah that we do every night from Passover till Shavuot, 49 days. There's so much to talk about it. We talk about it on Fridays and we learn the Hasidic discourses. But let's talk a little bit about this, even just from the perspective, simple, straightforward meaning and the simple, straightforward messages. So one of the interesting things to think about is, what are you counting? So you're counting. It's a very strange way to celebrate the harvest, because the second day of Passover, you bring an offering of grain, and you thank God for the new grain. And after that point, you're allowed to eat the new grain. So there's something called Chadash, is a prohibition to eat the new grain of that year before the second day of Passover. Why? Because the first grain has to be given to God. Okay, so the second day of Passover comes, and we celebrate the new grain. Okay, now what? Now you're counting. What are you counting for? Why are you anticipating? What are you anticipating? Why are you counting? So the rabbis come and say, oh, you know what you're counting for? The counting is a little bit different than the celebration of the harvest. Counting is because when the Jews left Egypt, they knew that they're going to receive the Torah, and Moshe said we're going to receive the Torah in 50 days. So because of the great anticipation, they counted 50 days until they got to the giving of the Torah. Right? That makes sense. You heard about this before, I'm sure. So they're counting for the giving of the Torah. Okay, what's the problem with that? Why is it connected to the raising of the Omer? You're bringing the new grain, and then you're counting, and the way we refer to it is we refer to it as the counting of the Omer. In other words, we're connecting the anticipation for the giving of the Torah with celebrating the new grain. It seems like it's two different things. Like, what is happening here? You want to celebrate the new grain. We already offered the new grain. That should be done with. Now we count for the Torah. But no, you're counting the Omer. Omer means the first measurement of grain. So why are we mixing in the Torah and the grain? And why are we counting from the grain to the Torah? It just seems like there's two things that are connecting here that are unrelated. But of course, it's consistent with what we said earlier, that everything is related. And one way to put this is we're celebrating the new grain. Okay. Now, if we celebrate the new grain and that's it, and we stop. So what does that tell you? We're so happy that God gave us the land of Israel and its produce. Is that our story? That's the end of the story? That's the goal? The answer is no. That's just the beginning. We celebrate the grain. The question is, why do we need grain for? In other words, what is the purpose of the material blessing? And that's what we say. From when we get the material blessing, we're going to start counting toward the giving of the Torah, because the giving of the Torah is the culmination of the physical blessing. Why do we celebrate the physical blessing? Because it allows us to celebrate and to bring holiness into our life through the Torah. So it's not a theme for itself. If it's a theme for itself, then you offer the Omer, and that's it. And now you start counting to the Torah. No, the counting of the Torah is referred to as the counting of the Omer, because the Omer is not a goal for itself. It's a way to prepare for the Torah. So I thought that's interesting. I'm just going to take a little bit of a break, because you always have to be plugged into the source. And sometimes when you forget that, Hashem puts the low battery mark to pop up onto your screen, remind you that you have to be connected to the source. So we'll try to do that. Some light spiritual message in this, right? Plug in. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, I want to talk about the number 7 because it's fun. If you look in this Parsha, and this is something I never said before, so I always try to say something a little bit new, because then you can say, oh, I heard this already. Okay, so let's say something new about 7. In Judaism, holiness is associated with 7. We know that. There's also 8. 8 is beyond holiness. 8 is transcendence. So for example, Shabbat is the 7th day of the week, and the 7th day of the week is holy. The 7th is holy. But everything 7 is holy. If you think about the 7th year, the sabbatical in Israel, every 7th year was a holy year. So 7 is the holiness, but 7 is holiness within the cycle of nature. Then there's something that's above nature, and that's represented by the number 8. And one example is circumcision. Circumcision is on the 8th day, and the rabbis say that's why, according to the Torah, circumcision actually overrides Shabbat. If the 8th day of a child's birth is Shabbat, you circumcise, even though technically circumcision is a violation of Shabbat, but circumcision overrides Shabbat. Why? Because 8 overrides 7. Because 7 is the natural number, and then the natural holiness, in other words, holiness within nature, and 8 is what transcends holiness that transcends even nature. Okay, so let's think about number 7, and let's think about number 7. We'll talk about what 7 represents. Just to run through the 7s. One of the problems is, why do we put Shabbat in this portion of holidays? Because as I mentioned, holidays is the days that invocations of holiness that the Jewish people determine when the holiday is. Shabbat doesn't fit that model. So one answer is because Shabbat is 7, so it's the 7th day. By the way, how many holidays are there? There are 7 holidays. 7 days that we don't do labor on, that we can't do labor. Biblically speaking, just 7. Outside of Israel, it's double that. But in Israel, you have first day Pesach, last day Pesach, first day Sukkot, last day Sukkot. You have Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. So there are 7 days. So again, 7 holidays. So again, 7 holidays. By the way, the Torah refers to Yom Kippur as Shabbat Shabbaton, the Shabbat of Shabbat. So in some ways, there are 7 holidays. 6 of them are the 6 holidays. Yom Kippur is the Shabbat of the holidays. Right, so you're sensing the pattern, the 6 days of the weekend and the Shabbat. There's 6 holidays, which is holier than the 6 days, then Shabbat, and then Yom Kippur is the Holy of Holies. When is the month with the most holidays? The 7th month. What we would call the month of of Tishrei, the month of what we would call the month of Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, is the 7th month in the Torah, because we count months from the month of Passover. So the 7th month has most of the holidays. I mentioned this earlier, that at the end of this parsha, we throw in the menorah. Why are you throwing in the menorah? Why are we talking about the menorah? We already mentioned the menorah twice already. So the commentaries point out, because we're talking about number 7. Menorah is number 7. Why menorah is number 7? Because menorah has 7 branches. Then we talk about the showbread. Why am I talking about the showbread? Well, the showbread, there were 6 loaves, double 6, but 6 and 6. And then the table is the 7th. Otherwise, why are we talking about the showbread right here? It doesn't belong here. We're not talking about the service of the offerings. So, according to some people, that's this pattern here. We're putting in all the things of number 7 because number 7 is whole. Why is number 7 whole? Like, why 7? Why not a different number? So there's 7 days of the week. Well, why are there 7 days of the week, right? So there's one philosophical interpretation, which I thought is very interesting. So, if you talk about this, I believe this is from the Maharal of Prague. If you talk about anything physical that's 3-dimensional, so everything would have 6. Well, if you have 4 directions and up and down, so you basically have a 6 direction. You basically have 6 directions. You have all 4 directions plus up and down. So the 6 directions, dimensions, but 6 directions. So the physical represents 6 dimensions, 6 directions. That's physical. Everything physical has to have all 6 directions. If you're within space, you're going to have six directions: east, west, north, south, up and down. Okay. 7 is the spiritual spark that keeps all 6 together, right? So that's why 6 represents physical. 7 represents the spark of holiness that brings all those 6 together, the holiness within creation. And then 8 transcends creation. But that's why you see why number 7, it's even expressed physically, number 7 represents the holiness. Go ahead.
Explain 7 and 8 again specifically?
8 is beyond nature. 8 is, holiness is 7. There's a concept within the Kabbalah, there's Mimale. There's the energy of Hashem that is invested within the world and creates everything. So according to the Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy, based on the Medrash, there's the word of God within every creation, giving it life. But the amount, there has to be a minuscule amount. It has to be a spark of God. Because if God in all his glory was in this table, the table would cease to exist. And if you have, wait just one second, let me finish the point. If you have a light bulb and you put in too much electricity, it's going to explode. So you have to have what the Kabbalists call tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means you have to contract. God has to remove the infinite light. And then there's a little bit of a ray of a light that then separates and descends and comes into every creation and creates everything based on, and creates everything and is invested in the creation within the properties of that creation, which is limitation. But then you have the infinite light. So where's the infinite light? So the infinite light hovers above. It's not within, it's above. And it transcends the specifics of the creation. So the infinite light affects me and you and the tree and the ant all the same way. It surrounds everybody equally because it cannot be invested within. Because if it's invested within, it's too much. It's going to cause the creation to cease to exist. Right? So then 8 represents the energy of Hashem that transcends creation. 7 is the spark of God within the creation. And then so in some ways, you ask every single thing, whatever you're doing, whatever you're engaging in, the physical aspects of that experience are the 6. But the inner point, what's the meaning of this is the 7.
Can you define transcend in these sentences?
I'm defining transcendent as, in the Kabbalah, we refer to it as makif, surrounds. And what we mean by surrounds means that it's present, but it's not felt, because the full intensity of the infinite light cannot be felt. Because if I would feel it, I wouldn't feel myself. So transcendent means it's maybe here, but it's beyond my consciousness. I don't sense it within my consciousness. And that would be beyond. You have some metaphors for that. So for example, when you talk about what is the equivalent of the 8th within a person's service of God, right? So in other words, is there a dimension of transcendence within the service of God? So the Kabbalah talks about this, where circumcision, what does circumcision represent? Circumcision represents devotion, creating a bond with God, devotion that transcends, that is above logic. How do I know? Because The Arabs circumcised at 13. Ishmael circumcised at 13. That represents a person is mature. He can understand there's a connection to God. He can understand that he's making a covenant with God. But when you take an 8-day child and you say that the child is 8 days old is having a covenant with God, you don't mean that this is a connection that can be understood. In other words, this is not a conditional, logical bond. This bond transcends logic. It's not limited to logic. It is therefore unconditional. So being unconditional is sort of a metaphor of number 8 within the person. It's beyond your way of consciousness.
And 2 to the third, say, how does that work into this?
That you have to help me. That's something I'm leaving something for you, but I'll think about it. Go ahead, doctor.
Because that's 3 dimensions.
I was going to ask you.
There's dimensions, but I'm saying this. That's why I wouldn't say 6 dimensions. I would say there are 6 directions. And in the simple world, what the eye can observe, everything I look at my phone. Whatever I look at, there's 6 dimensions. And that's why even when we say the Shema, it says you have to metaphor. You're supposed to say that there's 7 heavens, the earth, and the 4 directions. The Dalet is the 4 directions. The Chet, I don't know if you ever heard that meditation. Okay, we'll talk about that another time. But the bottom line is we have 6 directions, but then the inner meaning of these everything physical can be divided into 6 directions, and the inner meaning is 7. So what am I doing here? That's 7. What is the content? What is the inner meaning of this concept? Is 7. Go ahead, doctor. I'm sorry.
My question you've partially answered, but I would like to develop a little bit further. It would seem to me that the 7, which is adding the spiritual spark to the physical, should be the day of circumcision, because basically it's physical and it's spiritual. So it's logical to me that the circumcision should take place on the 7th day, where you add that extra bit of holiness to something that's very physical.
So the answer is that 7 is also related to the 6, right? 7 is Shabbat. Shabbat is not separate and apart from the rest of the days. To the contrary, Shabbat is everything you worked on throughout the day, throughout the week, is elevated Shabbat. Why did you go to work? So I can have some money in the account. Why don't I need money in the account? So on the weekend, I can rest. In other words, everything you're doing, the Shabbat is the culmination of the rest of the week. Okay. But circumcision is not just holiness within creation. Circumcision is the devotion that transcends logic. 7 is holiness that is logical. Logical means I can understand it. The idea of 8 is that there's something that is beyond my ability to comprehend. That's 8. It's above creation. Now, do I understand God? Okay. Let me ask you a simple question. Do I understand God? The answer is, God as a creator, I understand. There are certain elements of God that I can understand. In other words, it's logical. The logic would go something like this. If there's an effect, there has to be a cause. If there's something that is designed, there has to be a designer. So God is the designer of the universe. Very simple, straightforward. That's number 7. That's God is a designer of the universe. What's the problem with that definition of God? The definition of God is that you're limiting him to the designer of the universe, but really he's much more than that. So if I say, what is Dr. Tamarin? And you say, Dr. Tamarin is somebody who knows how to play a musical instrument. Is that true? Yes. But does that incorporate everything about Dr. Tamarin? Of course not. You're so much beyond that. So do I understand God? I understand God as a creator, but God's true infinity, impossible for me to comprehend. So number 7 represents the holiness that I could relate to. God created a world. There must be a purpose. I sense God's presence within the world, and I sense God's presence within nature. I understand what God wants from me. That's all 7. That's all God as he relates to creation. I understand God. God is the creator. Then that makes sense. But you know what the Kabbalah says about creator? This is not the essence of God that he creates. Creation is something he does. That doesn't define him. It's something you do. And let's say you're the teacher. And whatever you did something. That doesn't define who you are. You're that, but you're much more than that as well. So number 8 is not the spark of holiness that holds the 6 together. What about God himself, who's totally removed from the universe? Because he's infinite. Because I'm going to say transcend, but I don't want to use that word because it's just a word. But he's far beyond all of creation, because the fact God as a creator that doesn't define him. It's only something he does, right? If you say, you're so talented, you know how to shovel the snow. Okay, I'm very complimented that you think I know how to shovel the snow, but if you tell me that's all I do, I'm going to be offended, right? I'm much more than that. So 7 is the godliness that's invested within the creation. 8 is the recognition that God is way beyond what we can comprehend. Now go back to circumcision. So why not wait till you're 13 to circumcise, and then you'll understand God and you'll create the bond. Because what you understand about God is not God anyway, right? God is far beyond what you can understand. So 13 and 8 days old is all the same. In other words, when you create the unconditional bond, you're actually honoring the fact that he's beyond what you can comprehend. So I don't know if I fully explained this, but at least a little bit to think about, but even to think about some, even just sort of, it's an image, the imagery of number 7, that every creation has 6 directions, and that's the physical elements. But 7 is what's the inner glue of these different elements? What is bringing this together? What's the inner purpose? What's bringing it to life? What is its inner story? That's the 7. And that's what Shabbat is, because I know it's a holiday, because all week we're navigating the 6 directions. We're trying to achieve physical, we're trying to achieve physical success. So we're trying to achieve and make a difference in the physical world. But then what's the inner meaning of all of this? Why am I doing this? And what's the meaning of this? And what's the value of all of this? And what's the deeper energy within that I connect to? And the seventh point, which is the point of holiness, which is the point of Shabbat. So it just explains that why everything here is the number 7. There are 7 holidays, 7 days that are holy. Shabbat, every 7th day is holy. The 7th month has most of the holidays. The elements of the service in the temple that the Torah incorporates here is the menorah, which has 7 branches, the showbread, which is 6 plus 1, 6 and 6 plus 1. But there's 6 rows of bread, 2 6 double, but 6, and then the table is the 7th. Because that's the image we're looking for. We're looking for, when I interact with the physical, which is number 6, I say, what's the 7th point? What's the core of this creation? What's at the center holding all the directions together? And that is the divine, and that's the holy. Just to conclude, because I mentioned it earlier, there's the Talmudic interpretation of the word echad. Hashem is one. So Aleph, echad has 3 letters, Aleph, Chet, Dalet, which is 1, 8, and 4. So Aleph is 1, one represents God. Chet represents 8, represents the 7 heavens and the earth. I'm getting into what the 7 heavens are. In the Talmud, in the Medrash, there are 7 dimensions to heaven, but there's 7 and then earth. So Chet is above and below. And then Dalid is 4, is the 4 directions. So basically what you're doing is you say, when you say Echad, the Talmud says this, when you meditate that Hashem is the king above and below and the 4 directions. And that's in the word Echad, in the letters of Echad. In the summer, we're going to do a class on the Shema, the meditations of the Shema, and that's exhibit number 1. So you have a preview for exhibit number 1 of how it's in the letters. 1, 8, 4 is 1 above and below, and then 4 directions. What do you have here? You have here the 7th, which is the 1. In other words, you have the 6 dimensions above and below, and then you have bringing the oneness into that 6, gets you to the number 7, gets you to the Shabbat. So every time you say Shema, Hashem Echad, God is one, what you're really doing is you're interacting with the 7th element. So that is how every day there's a little bit of Shabbat, which is the time you pray, is the 7th element of that day. So that was fun. So thank you, everybody.
What besides circumcision is connected to the number 8?
What besides circumcision is connected to number 8? I have to think about that, but there are different things within the rabbinic writing. So, for example, there's a medrash that says, the first thing that comes to mind is a medrash that says that when the Levites played in the temple, maybe you'll relate to this in the instruments, so they had a harp, and the harp had 7 strings. We have musicians here, multiple musicians here. You tell me what this means. I know nothing about music, but I think even the piano has 7 keys. I don't know. I don't know anything about this. Says the Medrash, in the Messianic era, there's going to be an upgrade. When the Levites play the instruments in the temple, the harp is going to have 8 strings. Okay, who cares? Okay, another music. Oh, so the mystics say, and that's not just another element and not another note. It represents the fact that we're going to be able to touch the number 8. In the times of the temple, we were able to touch the number 7, which is godliness as he is invested within creation. But then you want to get to the transcendent elements of God, you got to pull out not your harp with 7 strings, but you have to pull out your harp with 8 strings, and that represents you getting to a deeper understanding. Are there other things in Judaism that are 8? I'm sure there are. Just skipping me right now. Oh, by Yom HaShmini, you had the day the day of the inauguration of the temple. In this week's in the book of Leviticus, the 3rd parsha of the book of Leviticus is there was 7 days of inauguration, and it was on the 8th day. What happened on the 8th day? God dwelled in the temple. Now, it wasn't the 8th day. It was day number 1. It was Sunday. It was the first day of the month, and it was the first month. So I would call it the first day. It was Sunday. It was 1-1-1. It was Sunday of the first day of the first month of the first day of the first month. But yet we refer to it as the 8th day. Why? Because there was 7 days of preparation, and following the 7th day of preparation, there was this day. But you could have called it Sunday. You didn't have to call it day 8. But the Torah refers to it as day 8, and the Kabbalists make a big deal about this. And they say, the Kli Yakar and others, they say, Yom HaShmini, 8th day, because in the temple, you can get a little bit of the 8th dimension. And there's all kinds of allusions to it. And in the song of the crossing of the sea, it says, Az Yashir Moshe, then Moses will sing. When is then? It's past tense. Why is it future tense? So the Medrash says, then means also this is an allusion to the resurrection of the dead, that Moshe sang not only in the past at the crossing of the sea, but also in the future. He's going to sing. So that's the allusion to the resurrection, which is another whole story. I don't want to get into that right now. But the bottom line is the Kabbalists say, what's Az? What's then? Az is the Aleph and the Zayin. Aleph is 1, Zayin is 7. 7 is the holiness. The one riding over the 7 is the 8th dimension. And the 8th dimension produces this beautiful music. And that's the song of the crossing of the sea, which was more profound than anything else. We know that the Medrash says that the Jewish people proclaim, this is my God, this, and this means you could point and see it. And the Medrash says that even a maidservant at the crossing of the sea saw more prophecy than Ezekiel, the greatest Jewish prophet. So at this crossing of the sea was a great revelation of God, also related to the 1 and the 7. I'm sure there are other references too that I skip my mind right now. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, I would like to offer another connection to this time period, which is 7 times 7 we count, and then it comes day 50, where we get something way beyond that we can comprehend at the time. So is there a connection?
Yeah,
like 7 times 7 is a connection to the AD, so day 50 in a way.
Yeah, 50 is like 8. Even so, you have the counting of the Omer. Shavuot is the 50th day, and there's this whole thing in the Kabbalah that there are 49 gates of wisdom that a person can achieve on their own. 7 times 7 you can achieve on your own, because 7 is within nature. So whatever you can achieve on your own is within 7. 7 times 7, 49. 50th gate you cannot get on your own. 50th gate must be given to you from above. And there's a beautiful medrash that said, well, I don't know if it's a medrash, I think it's a medrash, that the Torah says that Moshe, on the day that he passed away, he climbed up and he passed away on Mount Nivo. Nivo is the name of the mountain. Nobody knows where it is. No one knows exactly where he passed away, but it's called Mount Nivo. So I think the Medrash says this, not the Medrash on the Kabbalah, that Nivo is 2 words, Nun Bo. 50 is in it. Moshe, through his lifetime, could achieve the 49 gates of wisdom. The 50th gate, he cannot achieve on his own. It's gifted to him the day of his passing. And that's why he climbs the mountain, Nun Bo, to the 50th gate. And in a way, every Shavuot is what we can, every time we get the Torah, we're getting the 50th gate. Because it's a very interesting discrepancy that we could have talked about this, but I'm running way over time. So another minute or two, I feel horrible doing this. But there's a discrepancy. On one hand, the verse says, count 7 weeks. What is 7 weeks? 49 days. On the other hand, the Torah says, count 50 days. Tisperu chamishin yom. So am I counting 49? Am I counting 50? It's a contradiction. 50th day is the holiday, by the way, Shavuot. But am I counting 49? Am I counting 50? Contradiction. What are the commentaries explain? You can only count 49. You can never reach the 50th gate. But if you count your 49, if you do everything you could do, then God promises to give you the 50th. So in a way, it's like you counted it because it came as a result of your counting, but you didn't count it because you can't get to the 50th gate. So even within every year when we count, then we prepare, and then we get the revelation of the Torah, there's what I could achieve on my own, finding the holiness within nature, that's 7. And then 8 is something given to me beyond that which I could achieve on my own. And now I'm really stealing from next week because next week is the 7-year, the sabbatical, the law of the sabbatical, 7 years you rest, and then of course the Jubilee. And what's the Jubilee? Yovel in biblical Israel. You go back to scratch, all the land goes back to its owner, all the servants go free, sort of a reset of everything. We call freedom throughout the land. That's the 50th year. That's beyond the normal cycle of commerce. And that is the Jubilee year. And of course, that's the verse written on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia from next week's Parsha. The 50th gate is the 50th year, but 50 is related to 8. Thank you, Vicky, for that. That's a preview for next week. So next week, you don't want to be anywhere else other than right here at 10:15.
Can I ask you one final thing, Rob?
Yes, of course. But we don't take hostage. We don't take prisoners. Everybody's welcome to go. Those who want to stay longer could stay longer.
Here's my question. Is there any experience in the history of Judaism throughout the years where psychedelics were used? And if they were used, was the goal to achieve 7 or the goal to achieve 8?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that fully. I would just say that there's the concept of trying to get beyond the self. That was something that spiritual seekers in general, but within Judaism as well, there was something to sort of lose the self, go beyond the self, either through meditation, maybe through different forms of smokes, substances, but I don't know to what extent. I'm not sure I'm an expert. I'm an expert in that, but the idea to try to go beyond the self was something that every spiritual seeker is trying to do. We're really to escape the confines of self. So 7 is the confines of self, but 7 is holiness, but it's still self. But can I go beyond the self? So the short answer is I don't know.
Well, it sounds like the goal of losing the self is to move to 8.
To 8, yeah. But the only question is if it's done through psychedelics or it's done how it's done. Yeah, or meditation. But yeah, we'll say. By the way, one thing I forgot, which I should have forgotten, which I cannot be forgiven for forgetting. There's no excuse for this, but you want to know what else is number 8 in Judaism, and of course, Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is fascinating because Hanukkah is we took the temple menorah, which has 7 lights, and we make a holiday that has 8 lights. Okay, so we're clearly this is premeditated. We're moving from number 7 to number 8, and the Kabbalah goes wild with the lights of Hanukkah. Lights of Hanukkah, in some ways, are more profound than the lights of the temple, because the lights of the temple are lit in a holy environment. Lights of Hanukkah could be lit everywhere in the world. They're also lit at night, as opposed to the light of the menorah, which is lit during the afternoon when the sun is still shining. So the idea that if you really want to get to every corner of the darkest places of the world, 7 is not going to help you. You have to get a transcending light. That's number 8. That's the power of Hanukkah, even over the temple even over the light of the temple. So if you want to think about 8, circumcision is 8, Hanukkah is 8.
Did the Rebbe ever talk about achieving number 8 in his life?
I have to think about that. Number 8. Yeah. That was. It's in Hasidic philosophy. It's every time you get to the 8th day, the portion of the idea of going unconditional is number 8. In other words, a relationship with unconditional number 8. Why? Because 7 is what is within your realm of nature. It means what is logical to you, what makes sense to you. But if I'm going to go beyond what makes sense to me, if I'm doing something unconditional, then I'm tapping into number 8. And the Rebbe was all about being unconditional, like devotion. It doesn't have to make sense right now. Go for it, push forward, achieve, go beyond the self. Always pushing people to go beyond the self. Yes, always to touch the 8th dimension. So I don't know if he talked about it within his own experience, but within Hasidic life, within Hasidic philosophy, you can't go through the yearly cycle without hearing about the 8th. When you talk about in the stories of the Torah, it mentions circumcision. When it comes to Hanukkah time, we're all about number 8. Neil is saying Sukkot is number 8, but also the 8th day. And Sukkot is number 8 because, again, it's an interesting place. Sukkot is 7th day, then Shmini Atzeret is the 8th day. And then you have 7 days of Passover, and then the 50th day is really the 8th day, too, the continuation. So the 8th is the transcending, is the going beyond.
Thank you.
So everyone will be able to tap into the 6, which is the physical world, get to the core of the physical world, which is the spark of God, within every creation. That's number 7. That's what we do every Shabbat. And then at times we get to number 8. We get to the holiness that is even beyond the holiness invested in the world. It's achieving that what is outer worldly, what is beyond our natural capacity to achieve. But God gives us the opportunity to tap into that as well.
So what you're saying basically is that how far ChatGPT goes, how far artificial intelligence goes, it could never go to number 8.
It can never go to infinity, right? So infinity, there'll always be an infinity, and infinity is number 8. Now, what is the outer limitation of our 7 expands? So 7 is the holiness that we can understand. So the definition of 7 expands, right? A young child understands a little bit, and as you get older, you understand more, hopefully. So the limits of our knowledge expand, but we're never going to be able to understand infinity or experience infinity. So there's always the number 8. Now, what is infinity for infinity is also relative. What is beyond the capacity to understand it. So infinity for a 2nd grader is not infinity for an 8th grader. We're calling infinity anything beyond. It's like, what do you call space? Anything beyond a certain level of the atmosphere is beyond you. Now, within that is an infinite world, not infinite, but it's a no, beyond the capacity to understand how broad it is. But the point here is, so we can keep expanding our 7, but there'll always be an 8. There'll always be that which is beyond our capacity to understand.
Well, let me ask you this then: is 8 something you can feel but not understand?
In a way, could you understand infinity? So in a way, yes. There's the Zohar says like this. In a way you could. Here's a statement from the Zohar. No mind can grasp God, but God could be grasped with the feeling of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can't understand the essence of God, but I could yearn for the essence of God. Right? So in a way, because when the heart grasps, it doesn't have to understand. It doesn't have to limit it. Right? So in a way, that the core of your soul senses it and intuits that there's something beyond reality as we know it. So that's something that you can't necessarily understand, but you can intuit it. You can intuit it in a way.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and I hope this was enjoyable. I had a great time. Thank you. See you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank
Great.
you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.